Hi, folks. Welcome to Honor and Transitions Parent Forum. I'm Andy Durstein, Clinical Director here, and I'm joined tonight by Caitlin Forcier, who is one of our other therapists and also is involved in the admissions office here. So tonight we're going to be talking about effective parent communication with your emerging adult children. But before we get started, I wanted to give Caitlin a chance to introduce herself and give a little bit of her background. So it's all yours.
Thanks, Andy. I have had the opportunity to meet some, but not all of you, some in person and some chatting remotely. So it's been a pleasure to meet those of you who I have met, and I'm hoping that I get to meet more of you in the future. I am a New Englander, born and raised in Vermont, New Hampshire, having been living in Utah for the last 10 years. So the bulk of my experience in this field has been with a nonprofit in Utah, specializing in supporting at-risk children and families, initially working with families in their homes to prevent out-of-home placement by working to teach parents parenting skills and their kiddos skills that they needed to address the risk that was happening in the home and try to keep everybody on track so that a student would not need to be placed outside of their home. Later on in my time in Utah, I worked at a therapeutic boarding school for teenagers and acted as an aftercare coordinator who did a lot of the discharge planning and follow-up support for those students as they returned home to their families across the country. And then later as an admissions officer and coordinator for that program, helping identify referring students' appropriateness of fit and planning for their arrivals at our school, and then supporting and making sure that they're getting settled in and all of that. So I met our owners and founders, Tracy and Daryl, several years ago at conferences throughout the United States and struck up a pretty friendly conversation and friendship over the years. Just felt like a really good fit, mutual values, and just kind of a shared passion for the work that we do. And late last year, we began a discussion about how could we figure out a way to have me join the Onward family. And so that led to ultimately my move from Utah back to the East Coast, which I was thrilled about. And I left Utah in late January and joined Onward Transitions in February of this year. So I'm super excited to be here. This is my first family forum with Andy. And that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Caitlin. I also want to mention that our other clinician, Jackie Roberge, is running the board here. So she's kind of the wizard behind the screen, taking care of all this. So
making the magic happen.
Making it happen, exactly. So, okay, communication. We want to start from this basic premise that what we're really shooting for here is maintaining this adult-adult relationship between yourself and your emerging adult child, who are anywhere between the ages of 18 and 29 around here. And so we emphasize that with them as well with parents. So, a lot of times when members go home for holidays, we upfront talk about, the potential for regression, slipping back into, for example, letting mom make my bed instead of me maintaining that adult stance and doing it ourselves. But it also plays out in communication patterns. You've been their parent and they've been your child for a good number of years, and there's some well-worn paths there. And it's not uncommon that parents are in the role of kind of the emotional pursuer in terms of communication, and the young adult is in the role of distancer, and it may feel like you're chasing them all the time just to get them to communicate. That's a fairly normal developmental kind of interaction for a 20-something who is working on individuation and autonomy. And it's still something that they can work on. Moving into adulthood means recognizing the importance of reciprocity in relationship with our parents and being able to communicate effectively without, having to be pursued all the time to do that. So that's just a quick piece on that adult relationship.
And Andy, I just want to jump in and make a point too to recognize for our parents that we know that can be a really difficult time. It can be a hard transition to accept and recognize that there's going to be a change in the communication pattern and the frequency and the content of what's being talked about and shared, and that can be hard for parents. So we want to make sure that you know that we hear you and know that that's a tricky part. And every family system goes through that as their young adult, grows up and moves on and starts to build that independent life that Andy was talking about. So yes, it's normal, and we know it can come with some growing pains.
Sure. Okay. So we wanted to talk some about, different forms of communication, frequency, content, times of day that make the most sense. And so Caitlin and I we wanted to add some perspective to this. So Caitlin and I were talking about our own experiences of communicating with our parents at this age. Now we have email, we have text, phone, Zoom calls, snail mail, which never gets used much, Facebook, Instagram. Now, when
any number of social media platforms.
Yeah, with immediate sort of interaction expected. At their age, I was in college, which was back in the late 70s. There was one payphone in my fraternity. And, I might talk to my parents on the phone once every 2 weeks. And it was just sort of a quick catch up, and how are you doing? We miss you and all that sort of stuff. And that was it. So I wasn't sharing day to day what was going on, and they weren't asking. But that was really the only form of communication, and that's changed a lot. And Caitlin, your experience was a little different.
Yeah, I was a little less archaic than you, Andy, but still relied on a phone that was attached to the wall. I was in college in the early 2000s, and so right at the cusp of social media. It hadn't really started yet. It certainly wasn't in my world. We had dorm phones in our dorms. And a lot of time my communication with my parents was via voicemails. They would leave me a voicemail and I might call them back at some point and leave them a voicemail. They were working at that time. So I might leave a message on the house phone knowing that they would get it when they came home from work. And that was just sort of how we existed. We did have cell phones at the time, but they were the original cell phones, not anything with a fancy screen with lights. It was just bare minimal phone calls and ever so slightly the beginning of text messages. So yeah, certainly not as sophisticated as it was today. And quite frankly, sometimes I feel like it was a little bit easier than with less options.
Yeah. So now we're faced with all of these options and people texting multiple times a day, emailing, all the things that we identified. So trying to sort out what's the best frequency, first of all, how often should we be reaching out to our adult kids? I don't know that we have a hard answer on that. I think probably with all of these pieces of communication, utilizing the facilitated family calls that we have weekly with the therapists is a good way to set some boundaries and expectations around that. I think obviously most of our young adults around here don't want to get a dozen texts a day from their parents, checking in on every detail of their day. Some of them do want to have contact with their folks every day. Others, maybe a weekly check-in. So it really is individualized and depends on the relationship. So I think the best advice here is, whether it's myself or Caitlin or Jackie on the family calls, let's bring it up and talk about it and set some expectations. that
Yeah, because I feel like if a lot of times it's easy to kind of have parents on one side and emerging adult on the other kind of griping about what the other one is wanting and expressing. But sometimes if we haven't sat down and really had a conversation and helped to understand where the other party is at and come up with a mutual plan, it can just stay that way where both parties are a little bit dissatisfied without having had that guided and supported conversation to figure out what's going to work best for everybody.
Yeah. Okay. So, I think it's also important to sort of practice your own self-awareness, and some of this acceptance and commitment work that we do here, and really take stock of, why am I reaching out to my adult child? Is it because I need to communicate something to them? I just want to be able to check in and say hi, or am I worrying? Is my own anxiety, this is a bit of this emotional intelligence, is my own anxiety leading me to want to reach out to them just to get some reassurance myself that they're okay? Now, that's okay, but I think it's important to recognize what the drivers are behind communication, particularly if you find yourself reaching out a lot and then getting more anxious if you're not hearing back from them right away. We've sort of been conditioned to these immediate responses these days.
Yeah, due to that technology.
Yeah. So in terms of steps to communicating effectively, you want to speak to this a bit, Caitlin?
Sure. I mean, one of my background came in the form of the teaching family model, and what the model is known for is a lot of really great breaking things down into key steps that are understandable and easy to kind of adhere to and guide conversations and behaviors. So one of the things that sticks out to me about effective communication, a lot of times, again, we're rushing, we're talking to each other in kind of non-traditional ways. When we have the opportunity to be face-to-face, whether it's over a screen, either on a computer or on the phone or actually in person, and this can be applied over the phone too, but I think face-to-face communication, eye contact, taking the time to really show the other person that you are listening to them, you see them, you hear them by giving them your full attention and maintaining eye contact during a conversation is really, really important. So I want to make sure I stress the eye contact piece. The other thing too is when we have this, and we all learned this when we were kids, but sometimes it's easy to kind of fall away from it, especially when we get into the informality of our family dynamics and our interdependent or interrelationships with one another within our family, is making sure that we're listening fully without interrupting to a person's thought. Right now, Andy is not jumping in while I'm speaking. He's sitting here quietly listening to me finish my thought. So I think that's a thing that is sometimes can be overlooked, especially if we're talking about something that's difficult or exciting. You might want to jump in and share a thought when you have something that comes to you, but really being able to take a breath, sit back, and fully listen to what the other person is saying before you respond, that's a really, really helpful thing, listening without interrupting. The next step is, if you feel like you didn't understand or didn't get what they were saying, or you need clarification, reflect back and clarify what you heard them say. So I might say to Andy, so what I just heard you say is that there's a lot of different ways that we can be reaching out and be connected with each other. Did I get that right? And Andy would then have the opportunity to say, yeah, you got that right. Or no, what I was really trying to say was X, Y, Z. And so taking that extra time to really just pause, make sure you're on the same page and you really took in what the other person was trying to say before moving on with your own response in the conversation. And then once you've done that and you feel like or you heard them effectively and they were feeling fully understood, then you move on with your response. And so those key things, I think, are really great, and they help kind of slow down the process and reduce sometimes that stress and anxiety that can come in difficult conversations, or even easy ones.
Yeah. And, and for many of our members, your adult children, as you well know, experience moderate to significant levels of anxiety, and many of them also have slower processing speed relative to their native intelligence. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it takes them a while, because of those factors, to sort things out, and to really kind of process and understand the information and come to a perspective of their own. So, it's sometimes helpful to say, I don't need an answer now, but, can we follow up and talk about this tomorrow, so that they have time to slow the process down and really think it through in a way that isn't reactive or defensive or, just in the moment reactivity. So, I think that's another way that we can be helpful in communicating with them. One of the things that we also really encourage is run things by us first. If you've got, a difficult email that you want to send to your adult child, but you're not quite sure how it's going to be received, send us a draft. And we're happy to go through it with you, give you some feedback, and then go ahead and send it off. But use us as a resource. Mm-hmm. We're transitional figures in their lives right now, and what we want is for them to bring issues to us. We're the folks with them in the day-to-day practice of life right now, and so we want them to step back from you being the first person they call when they're struggling or when they're having some anxiety or indecision or whatever. I can't get out of my apartment. So encourage them to direct that stuff back to us. If they're reaching out to you with sort of these immediate kinds of issues or crises that, maybe in the past they have been reliant on you to problem solve for them or with them. Validate it, help them to recognize that you understand that they're having a hard time. And, that's why Caitlin's there. So see if you can reach out to her, because we really want them to, part of developing and maintaining the adult-adult relationship with you is not having to turn to you to problem solve everything for them. Now, there are some things where it makes perfect sense to reach out to our parents who have the collective wisdom of being around longer. But it doesn't have to be all the little day-to-day things that these guys sometimes struggle with.
Yeah. And I think that is a really good example of a great opportunity and a time to use some of those effective communication techniques by just reflecting back what you're hearing them say. I hear that you're having a really hard time getting out of bed. It sounds like you didn't sleep very well last night and you're having some low motivation right now. That's just a simple restating of what you're hearing them say in that moment. And that's a perfect opportunity for you to then prompt them to say, why don't you use your supports at OT and reach out, whether it's to Andy or one of our coaching staff members or another clinician, and turn them right on around. But with that, you will have, again, validated, heard them, and helped them feel like they are being understood in that moment and supported without doing a thing for them to solve the problem.
Right. And, again, our foundational therapeutic model here is acceptance and commitment therapy. So accepting that you're going to experience some difficulty as you move towards, that purposeful behavior, the committed action, whether it's getting out of your apartment today or applying for a job or, showing up to class. And so they may very well turn to you because this is what they're used to doing to kind of have you help them sort of ease the difficulty they're experiencing. But them experiencing that difficulty is part of the therapeutic process. Mm-hmm. And so we don't want you to come in and make it better for them. We want you to validate. We want you to communicate with us if you have concerns that, this is sort of a significant thing that they're struggling with. But we want them to hang in there with some of that discomfort and work it through. And some of that acceptance and commitment therapy applies to parents too, that sometimes we, as parents, have to sit with the discomfort of not knowing exactly what's going on in our adult children's day-to-day lives. As a parent, sometimes I just assume not know, but it is nonetheless anxiety producing. So we get it. So don't feel like you have to be their emotional buffer or take on their emotions or solve the problems. Just be there, be present for them and direct them back to the resources that they have day to day here. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about conversations about expectations. And it's, as parents, it's perfectly okay and necessary to have expectations. And, expectations can be around, okay, we talked about us having a Sunday afternoon phone call every Sunday, and you didn't call. I'm disappointed that we didn't talk on Sunday. And remember, we agreed we were going to do that. That's perfectly appropriate. Expectations around maybe how much rent money they're going to contribute to their apartment here, based on how much money they're earning and, and whether that's going to incrementally increase over time. So it can be any number of things. And, this is sort of standard advice, I guess, but, be clear, be consistent, and follow through.
Mm-hmm.
So if you say, I'm willing to pay, 75% of your rent as long as you're in school taking classes, that's a great model.
Yeah. Great motivator.
Yeah. And make sure you stick with it.
Yeah.
Like they start to struggle and, our sort of parental instincts kick in, and we want to sort of swoop in and make it a little easier for them. There are times when that's appropriate, but that should be a conversation and a decision that we all make together therapeutically. Mm-hmm. So, consistency and follow through. They are young adults. And so we're no longer parenting them, in an authoritarian way. And just telling them what is because I'm the parent and I say so. So I think it's important that there be room for negotiation around some of these things, mm-hmm. reasonably.
Within reason, that's key, right, Andy?
Yes, and that's sort of a moving target, and reasonable is different with every family. But it's important for our young adults here to feel as though they have a voice in their own life. Again, within reason. So, a lot of those kinds of conversations, how much to contribute, what the expectations are, those are great topics and conversations to bring up in the weekly family calls, whether it's a phone call or a Zoom call, because you have us there facilitating and kind of clarifying as we go along.
Yeah. And I think, too, if you're ever not sure, or if you're not sure if there's another topic on the agenda for an upcoming call, send us an email, reach out ahead of time and just say, hey, I'm thinking about this. This has been kind of on my mind. Would it be okay if we brought this up, in our upcoming call or whatever? Keep that line of communication open if there's stuff that's on your mind, so that we can make sure that it gets covered at some point and not get swept under the rug and forgotten about until something bubbles over the next time.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing that comes up sometimes, in communication patterns with parents and our adult members here, it has to do with vacations and holiday breaks and those sorts of things. And I think as parents, we're used to thinking of, like college breaks. So I'm going to get a month off at Christmas, between semesters, and we can do whatever. And it's important to keep in mind that that's not the case here. That, for most of our members, they have a job and adult expectations. They need to manage that. They're not, they're working 20, 25 hours a week at Hannaford. They're not really in a position to go in and request big periods of time off, nor is it adult to suggest, well, why don't you just give notice at that job so we can take our family vacation and then you can come back and find another job. We really try and discourage that and encourage parents to honor the commitments that their adult children are making here, because that's part of adulthood.
Yeah. And in addition to that, outside of the job piece too, treatment, the work that they're doing here with us within our programming is still going on. We have a couple of holidays that the building is closed and staff are enjoying holiday too, but we're not going on those 3 to 4 week vacations like school is. We're still here. There's still work going on and really good value for your emerging adult to continue to be here and participate in the routine and the community that they've built as a part of this. We know that family vacations are important and time together is really important, but what we want to encourage is to just be really mindful about the purpose of time together, the amount of time together, because all of that equates a disruption in the work that they're doing here on the ground in Portland, and at times can be problematic and difficult to bounce back from.
Yeah. So, generally speaking, it's really helpful if you approach us in advance of having conversations about vacations, just to get a read on, the lay of the land here. What are the implications if our son or daughter comes home for a week, and is that counterindicated? Now, having said all that, we want, your sons and daughters in these young adults to come home and have visits. We're not trying to discourage that, but we want them to do it from the perspective of adulthood. Mm-hmm. So just requires a bit more communication and
planning,
the variables and planning. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of planning, Andy, one of the things that we had been, that came to my mind earlier when we were talking about all the different methods of communication and the checking in, one of the things I wanted to mention that could be helpful too when making plans to communicate with your kiddo or your emerging adult, not kiddo, they're emerging adults, is to reach out to them ahead of time and say like, hey, when might be a good time for us to talk on Sunday or Tuesday, whatever day it is, and see if you can plan on a time together as opposed to calling them whenever it feels right for you or fits into your schedule. That will give them a semblance of control and also feel like their time and their life here is being respected by you, because oftentimes we've got different states and different time zones going on. So checking in ahead of just saying like, hey, we're thinking about you. We'd love to connect. When's a good time for you? Mm. I think that's a really great prompt that shows respect and care for all parties. So I wanted to make sure that we brought that piece up. That trying to plan a time ahead of time is a great way to start the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that probably about covers our conversation on communication. If you have any questions, reach out to any of us, and we're happy to talk with you about it and do some problem solving with you. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Caitlin, thanks for being here. And Jackie, thank you for managing behind the scenes here. I appreciate it.
Happy fall, everybody.
Yes, very good. Okay, take care, everyone, and have a nice evening. Mm-hmm. Bye-bye.
Bye.